Welcome to the Sellernomics podcast, sharing valuable tips and information in the Amazon and e-commerce space. Each week, we deliver the best interviews with some of the top Amazon personalities in the industry to help you grow your business. Today's episode is brought to you by GETIDA, the global leader in FBA auditing and reimbursements. And now, here is your host, Rob Stanley.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Sellernomics podcast. Today I've got Yoni Kozminski. He is founder and CEO of MultiplyMii. What's up, Yoni?
How are we doing, Rob? Mate, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. And today we're going to be talking about how to hire top e-commerce talent for success. So we all kind of know that, when you get a company going, whether it's a brand or anything, you start expanding. You start needing services. Maybe it's a VA, maybe it's somebody in-house. These are things that a lot of companies go through, or even brands go through as they start to expand and get bigger. And today, luckily, we got Yoni on, and we're going to be talking about, some of these probably pain points and some of these tips that you could use when you are trying to expand or hire top people, talent that is, to help make your brand or company successful. So Yoni, going with that, let's talk a little bit about maybe, kind of how do you find out at what point is a good time to actually hire somebody, whether it be a VA or somebody in-house. At what point kind of have you seen people be at that point where they need to hire someone?
For sure. Well, I'll just give a quick background. MultiplyMii is an end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines. So we've now got about 150 people on payroll, have hired, probably well over 200 people in the last couple of years. That's also direct hires. So definitely have learned a thing or two when it comes to hiring talent. And so I think the classic founder's story or the classic growth trajectory and the experience for most people is that, I think it's called the Peter principle. You promote yourself to a state of inability, or rather like where you have a limited knowledge gap. So I think for most people, the easiest way to start to define who do I hire and when is, when my day gets too filled up and I'm doing tasks that I'm not passionate about or that I'm incapable of delivering on, that's when I should start considering in bringing on inside or outside help rather. So, the game, I don't know if you'd necessarily call it a game, but what I like to suggest to people is to really break down how their week looks and understand how they're investing their time and where it's going and what's actually moving the needle. So I know that we're both talking about the Amazon space, but a very clear and easy, early win is creating canned content for customer support. There's no reason why the founder should be spending 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a week responding to questions that you can already pre-build the answers to, and probably bringing in someone to handle that as an example. So yeah, I think that's a pretty easy way to look at it, sort of as a baseline level as you step into it, Rob.
Yeah, that's probably what I usually see also. But another question comes up is kind of what point do you see that when people are, let's say, either selling on Amazon or just selling e-commerce in general? When I say what point, I mean like a timeline. Do you usually see, most people are probably not hiring that person day one. Where are they kind of hiring that person? 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in? Where do you kind of see more people kind of in that process of running their company, starting to hire the type of person we just talked about?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of it comes down to foresight, vision, and planning. So, who do I want to be as a business owner or as a team member, and where do I want to get to? And that's how you sort of work backwards to understand, what is the right point. So if it's your first time going through the experience, I think that as soon as you are working more hours than you would like to, so, no founder that I'm aware of intentionally started a business so that they could work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It's not sustainable, and, it'll eat you alive by, when all is said and done. That's just not a way to live a healthy sort of work-life balance. So I'd say usually as you're getting to those stretch moments, that's when you walk into it. But if you're really strategic and you really plan out, what are the desired outcomes and who do I need working backwards to fill those gaps? That's when you sort of start to take it to that next level of planning and vision and ability to attract and bring in top talent. Yeah.
And do you think people should be also a little cautious when they're hiring somebody, right? You don't want to you were just kind of talking about like what point is a good time to hire somebody. You don't want to hire too early, because if you can't really afford them, or you're kind of stretching the budget a little bit to make that work, that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like, hopefully that money you're putting into them will make you money or help you, allow you to go make more money. But you also don't want to like stretch yourself too thin at some point where you're like, oh man, I got this person, I brought him up to speed, and now I really can't afford him. I got to let him go. So, that's also probably an area that people run into, that, they may need to really kind of feel out that, they can afford to get somebody. So, let's jump a little more into some of the roles that you've seen. We kind of covered one already, but what other roles are you seeing people filling that usually are kind of in their first couple people they hire?
Well, I would say this isn't the role that I would say that people often hire early on, but I think if more people were aware that A, these roles existed, and B, the impact they have, and the role they play in the business and that function, I think a lot more people would start to wisen up and get in on that. And the role or roles I'm talking about are roles like project managers or operations managers, things that are very much about inside business efficiencies and being able to actually effectively grow the company from an operational standpoint. It's all well and good, and most people are going to hire, the graphic designer or the PPC manager or the inventory or supply chain specialist, and roles like that. Probably, maybe not the inventory and supply chain person, but definitely PPC management, definitely designers. But what quickly happens for anyone who's been through this is that becomes a lot of different mouths to feed, and a lot of different areas in which you have to sort of stretch your time. So you sort of start to become that manager. Now, if you were to hire a project manager, let's say early on in the business, and they were the ones working with your freelancers, for example, then all of a sudden the relationship you'll have and your ability to scale becomes a lot more focused. Because if someone is only responsible for the delivery of projects or getting assets live on Amazon or inside your D2C e-commerce store or whatever it looks like, then the whole relationship changes. So I'd say that people should be considering project managers earlier, and should be considering them, period. You'll never understand what they do to a business until you have them inside of your operation, would be a word of advice there.
Yeah. So you were just talking earlier about like the Philippines and different places. So obviously, I'm sure everybody out there gets hit a million times from everybody who wants to be a VA for them. So let's talk a little bit about through the process of when you are looking for somebody, defining maybe that role. How do you either interview the person or find the right person? Because I've talked to a lot of Amazon sellers, and I always kind of hear I had to go through X amount of people before I found a good one. So how could people, sellers, Amazon sellers, or even sellers on e-commerce in general, maybe kind of cut through some of that to maybe get somebody who's a better fit quicker? And what kind of tips and things have you seen on that really help?
Yeah, so I'd say firstly, like there's 4 key problem areas that a lot of people run into when they approach the hiring. If they're hiring the right person, so they're unclear about what the actual need is in the job, or I'd say what most people struggle with right now is having a weak flow of candidates, or when you have that flow going and you're actually getting people applying, however that comes in, there's an inability to actually pick that right candidate. And the worst thing that can happen on that is you actually lose the candidate that you really wanted to work with in the first place. So I'd say that when you're approaching this decision making, I'd say throw out the traditional, I'm just going to jump on Google or Indeed or Monster or any one of these job boards and try and effectively find out, hey, this is what the responsibilities look like. This is what the job title is. I need a marketing manager. If you actually work backwards and you think to your business objectives and you look at what is the actual outcome, what does success look like inside of this specific competency or function in the business, I'll give you a really easy to understand example, and something that I've experienced inside of MultiplyMii a bit is that people will come in and say, I really need a marketing manager. I need a director of marketing, head of marketing, marketing manager. And when I ask them, well, what does that person do? It's that they handle all the marketing. And then when you start to dig a little deeper and you ask, well, what's the problem that you're trying to solve for right now? And as you dig deeper, you actually understand that all they're trying to do is, let's say, drive external traffic, through Google AdWords, or they want some really long-term strategy around their SEO because they want to rank organically long-term. You don't need to bring in, an extremely high-level individual to run and build out a whole team around you. Start working with what is the desired outcome and what are the skill sets look like to actually solve on that. So building what success metrics versus just grabbing a job description off the web, I'd say, is a really strong starting point. And then from there, actually building out a scorecard against how it matches up against each of those aspects would be a really smart way. So giving it a grading system and having specific comments and asking the same questions throughout. I think I'm answering your question there, Rob.
No, you definitely are. I've hired a lot of people, when I ran my own e-commerce company, and having a job description is definitely a big deal, right? Like, you want to have a job description that's fairly detailed. It explains what they'll be doing, what you expect from them, which also brings up things like SOPs. So, standard operating procedures. I think those are a tremendous help, especially if you're hiring somebody in that, they have the skills, but maybe the skills are going to be very specific to you. Like, you usually want certain things done a certain way. So you're going to want to have some SOPs in place. How do you feel SOPs play a factor into when you're hiring somebody to help you run your business?
Yeah. If you're asking me, I'm going to say it's one of the most critical things. I do have another business that's a process improvement consulting practice. And so in it, we understand what scale is. And especially when you talk about today's global 360, digital nomad / just, dispersed teams environment, having very clear standard operating procedures, building a very high level methodology as to how you as a business operate and what those processes look like. To throw a stat out to you, Rob, the cost of a failed hire is 15 times that of their base salary. So if you hired 100,000K, girl to come into business and that didn't work out, what you'll find is in lost time and that experience, you've actually lost, $1.5 million. Make that mistake, 4 or 5 times a year, and you're in a real pickle here. So getting that person or the right person into that role is significantly more important than just putting a body in the seat there. I can't stress that enough. And so there's a whole lot of ways in which you can actually systemize this process specifically and make, effectively better decisions around it. But to your question, Rob, we have SOPs around how we interview. We have SOPs around the different stages. Like, I can even fire you off some of the key questions that I'll ask on every single interview that I ever give. And they've come from high-level methodologies in the research that our team has performed over the course of the duration of the business and beyond. Yeah.
So we're going to actually have to do a quick commercial break, but once again, I'm talking with Yoni Kozminski, founder and CEO of MultiplyMii, and we're talking about how to hire top e-commerce talents for success. I would like to dive a little more into maybe any tips you could give regarding either tools or things you use to do your SOP. And then also let's talk about wages and what can be expected for some of these roles right after this message.
Today's episode is brought to you by GETIDA, the global leader in FBA auditing and reimbursements. Get $400 in free FBA reimbursements at GETIDA.com/Sellernomics.
Yeah, so once again, to get that $400 in free FBA reimbursements, head on over to GETIDA.com/Sellernomics. And again, I've got Yoni Kozminski on with me, and we're talking about how to hire top e-commerce talent for success. So right before the break, I was going to dive a little more into, Yoni, if you don't mind, SOPs. Are you using any tools, or are you just writing the SOPs from scratch, or doing video ones, or both? Maybe help us out a little bit for anybody who's interested. This obviously isn't the main topic of the show, but I think it'd be important that you maybe share a little bit on, tips, what you do when it comes to SOPs for the top talent you're hiring?
Yeah. So switching gears for a second here, and when we talk about SOPs, like I said, we have a process improvement consulting practice. So in it, we have a methodology on how we not only look at the maturity of a business, but we also have a way in which we document out SOPs, and that's ripe inside of the MultiplyMii business, and obviously how we approach the hiring process. But to take that step back and to think about building effective SOPs in any function of the business, I think one of the most critical stages, or one of the biggest errors that people make, is that they take what we call a bottom-up approach to building SOPs, where they'll jump in. Let's give the example of hiring. If I just jumped into building the process and started saying, right, well, this is the first interview question, and this is the third interview question, and this is how you do an interview, I'm not really taking into account where does that actually sit in the operational function of the business? Where does that sit in the core processes of the business and the fundamentals? So if you actually flip that and you take a top-down approach where you look at recruitment is one subset of the HR function, and inside of that HR function or beyond it, you have the supply chain and logistics and the operation function and customer service and brand management. I'm talking Amazon businesses now for a second. You really need to understand how each of these sync up so that it doesn't fall apart. And so one other little tidbit is that the way we look at businesses is systems. And so for us, a system consists of people, process, and technology. So you could have the best tool in the world, like, let's just use Helium 10 because most of the listeners will probably be across Helium 10. If you said, jump into the magnet tool and do a search and find this keyword, or leverage these keywords, you're not labeling key deliveries around it to make sure that that's built into a process and people are accountable. So just saying that the keyword, the listing optimization specialist will jump into the Helium 10 magnet tool every other week on a Friday to pull out this specific report and deliver this insight. That's a really fundamental language use where I stipulated who's accountable for it, at what time period and cadence, and what they're jumping into. So, just a couple of things, like having those little fundamental shifts in the way in which you build your SOPs as it relates to anywhere in your business will have you on a better trajectory to actually building it in a way where everyone can understand it, not just, what is really common where you, the person who builds it, is the only one who both knows where it is and understands how it works. So centralizing that and having a uniform way to build SOPs also really helps you at a business level understand what's happening in the business. So the person who needs to walk into recruitment can also walk into customer support and understand at a glance what's happening.
Yeah, I like that. I like that approach. And so the second question I'd asked just before the break was, regarding like pay, like what kind of pay, let's take, the first 2 or 3 people you're going to hire. You kind of already discussed a little bit about what those positions would be. I think second one was like PPC. First one was kind of a manager, so to speak. And I know you used a little different term there. But, why don't you start with those first 2 and, what's the kind of range you can expect? And probably it also depends on their experience. But let's discuss that a little bit. Tell us what your kind of what you've seen when it comes to salaries for those type of people.
Yeah, so I'll say as a blanket statement, the cost of talent globally has gone up, in some cases 85% just year on year, given the massive skill shortage and what's happening inside of the e-commerce space, having it move forward. Every week I hear it's a different, different aspect, but 10 years forward in the space of a year. So I'll say that, for any roles right now, talent is scarce, and it's really hard, especially with all the aggregators coming in and being able to throw a whole lot of money out there. I'm less familiar with the US market. I can only go on historic insights, having worked in the space for, over a decade. But for a project manager in the Philippines, for someone that's of any real value and substance, like as a base salary, not including benefits, you'd probably be starting at, I would say, about $800, $900, like if you were to hire them directly. And it can go up to probably about $1,500 to $1,800, depending on the level of talent. I'd say in the US, you'd probably be looking at entry levels of, if I had to guess, sort of $40,000 to $50,000 a year, depending on the state and where they're at. Surely New York would be high, a fair bit higher than that, and probably LA too. But again, depending on where it sits, and for a good ops manager, you're paying high six-figure salaries. For a high-level COO. So again, it really depends on where you're at in the business and at what stage, and also what business you're trying to build, right? Like, there's no blanket statement of who should be first, but I think about a lot of the entrepreneurs that I come across and speak to every day of the week. A lot of them are the visionary type that are very good at creating product or having deep insights into things they're passionate about. As they start to transition into management, it's not usually the most immediate skill set, and something that a lot of people have to learn and grow into. So I mentioned ops managers, junior ops managers, or project managers. I mean, these skill sets and functions really help hold everyone accountable into the delivery mechanic that is, the lifeblood of the business.
Yeah. So when you were talking about, we were talking about salaries a little bit. You were talking about hiring within the US, right? So what percentage do you usually see where people that are, running as Amazon company are going to hire US based versus some VAs? And I mean, I would assume, I wouldn't even assume. I know for a fact that VAs are going to obviously be cheaper than hiring a US based person, but sometimes you want that US based person because you have, they have a different skill set sometimes, or they have a different, kind of a go-to to be able to understand things a little bit differently than maybe a VA does. So what percentage do you usually see of companies that are hiring will hire VAs versus a US or even a European, depending where they're located, person for certain jobs?
Yeah, so it would really vary from business to business. For us internally, we're almost entirely out of the Philippines, and I would say that there's a huge distinction between a VA, a virtual assistant, and professional talent. And I think that that's the first thing to sort of call out, is that, we've all been living through a pandemic over the last couple of years where, experiences like this, having, totally digital relationships. I mean, you and I have met, fortunately, in the flesh, Rob, but for a lot of people, they haven't. And so we've learned to adapt and work with dispersed teams. Now, what I always look at in the business is, how much is this person in their defined objective going to move the needle, and how do I work backwards? So back to your question, I'd say it's all about the caliber of talent that you bring in, that you focus on first, and can they deliver on the desired outcome, and then you sort of work backwards. So I would say that from the companies that we work with, depending on sort of their level and their, it's a very different reality to have a bootstrap business versus, being funded by venture capital. You're going to attract different talent and different pay grades and different salaries as well. But I'd say for the most part, there'd be more senior management or ownership, US stateside or in the UK or across Europe. And then I'd say the really smart teams, if they build it out super intelligently, they'd build management at, C-level, or depending on how many layers, senior management out of the US, if it's a US focused company, or if it's globally dispersed and you're selling into, let's say, Europe, you might have team members there. But for all intensive purposes, I mean, the talent that we have inside of MultiplyMii and Escala, most of them are much smarter than I am. So, I'm not the best example of, we don't hire VAs. We only find professional talent who have experience in specific outputs. So if you're asking me, I will hire out of the Philippines, 9 times out of 10, unless there's skill sets that I can't find or can't find easily. An example of that is I've really struggled to find a high level marketing CMO, marketing manager type role out of the Philippines. And I think that it's probably limited experience and, or, it's a different cultural fit when you talk about the people that you're selling to. When it comes to MultiplyMii and Escala, having that experience, usually stateside, has a positive impact because they understand what's happening.
That seems to be a very common theme. Because as you know, I've been at a lot of the trade shows, and of course seen you at a lot of trade shows, and get asked all the time, Rob, how do we find a marketing person? And it seems to be a very common theme I hear, probably even weekly, to be honest, from quite a few different companies that I deal with. So one of the things, though, I do want to ask you, we do have to take a quick commercial break, but after the break, I do want to talk a little bit more about how much time it seems like a lot of people do build up the virtual teams. And I want to know kind of on a weekly basis, how much time you or somebody from your company is spending kind of with that virtual team to make sure that the VAs are, getting things done or they're meeting their goals. So we'll talk about that right after this break.
Did you know that Amazon probably owes you money for FBA reimbursements? Get $400 in free FBA reimbursements at GETIDA.com/Sellernomics.
Yeah, so once again, head on over to GETIDA.com/Sellernomics and get that $400 in free FBA reimbursements. And again, I have Yoni Kozminski, and he is founder and CEO of MultiplyMii, and we're talking about how to hire top e-commerce talent for success. So right before the break, I was talking to or asking Yoni basically on how much time he spends with working with the VAs or has somebody who works with the VAs to kind of set goals, make sure that they're all, working and doing what they need to be successful. And Yoni, so what's your kind of answer to that on how much time are you spending or somebody within the company spending with everybody who's these virtual assistants in the Philippines you're using to make sure that they're on task and being successful?
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at the company and the dynamic, it's like any other business. I mean, the talent that we have in the business is significantly smarter than me and a lot of the people that I've ever worked with. So, for example, the COO that I have out of the Philippines, she wraps companies up for sale. That was what she used to do from an operational standpoint. We've got 25 management consultants, most of which are ex-Ernst & Young. Some come out of Accenture, BCG, and Deloitte. So, these people are self-managed, much smarter than I am. And if it's not for them, there is no Escala, there is no MultiplyMii, and, we're not scaling at the rate we are. So from my personal perspective, I have very little operational touch. Even I don't even sit inside of sales right now. We have a organizational cadence and structure and strategy sessions each year. We build out our yearly goals. My entire Filipino team builds out the operational goals. Joan runs a week-long daily sessions on everything from the data management of the business all the way through to building out our capacity planning and the future state of what the operation will look like 12 months out. So, if you're asking me, we're running on EOS, we're running on Traction as a baseline. It's a really good framework and methodology to make sure everyone's aligned, from your L10 meetings all the way through to your 90-day rocks, which, is a really good baseline to run the operation. But in terms of like how much, I wouldn't ever call them VAs because they all are ops managers or data scientists or management consultants or senior recruiters. Like it's high level talent. We hire virtually almost entirely ex-corporate talent. So it's not the people that you're working with on, say, onlinejobs.ph, where I like to call it the gateway drug to the Philippines, where you find talent that's just good enough to get sort of baseline data entry and and things like that done for $2 or $3 an hour. You're finding high level talent who are actually building the frameworks and the methodologies and the maturity analysis and effectively where the business is going. So yeah, I mean, I can tell you more about how we run our operation, but I'm not sure that that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, that I think the answer you gave was perfect. So, just trying to get kind of a baseline of what you kind of feel. But, the other thing we should talk about a little bit is, when you are using these VAs, is there any sort of tools that you are using? Like, was there Monday? There's Trello. There's several others out there. Are you using any of those to kind of, maybe also help keep them in line? And then after that, let's talk a little bit more about MultiplyMii and what kind of services you guys are offering and how you can help some of the sellers, Amazon sellers out there.
For sure. So in terms of how we run our operations internally, I mean, the communications tools that we use Slack for sort of chat and conversations, and we use ClickUp. Yep. We're huge advocates of ClickUp. Inside of Escala, we actually build out everything from, a company's wiki to their working SOPs, training videos, and documentation, and then we integrate it into tools like ClickUp. So huge ClickUp aficionados, and outside of the regular Zoom and etc. We do not believe in time tracking software. So we have clients that really appreciate that, but I don't believe that that's the way to motivate people, and it should really be about output focus, not input in terms of how many hours you're clocking on. I think it's a dangerous road to go down, and one that is never going to yield. No one's motivated by clocking in and clocking off. So there's a whole different topic, but when you talk about performance management, you talk about actually motivating talent to realize their potential and grow to the areas in which they're both most passionate and best at. Time tracking software isn't going to be the thing that helps you get there. It's a roadmap to what does my future state look like? What are the drivers that I can affect in my daily today to impact a decision to give me that promotion? And what does that roadmap look like for my future success in the business? So ClickUp, Slack are our two go-tos.
It's funny you mentioned ClickUp, because I literally just got introduced to that this week. So, and haven't had time to actually go look into it. But I've had a few people kind of mention it, and I was just about ready to kind of look into that as an option also, or kind of see how it works. If not implementing, at least that, keep it in the back of my head as an option down the road. So let's definitely talk a little bit more about MultiplyMii. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys do, maybe how you got started, and how people contact you for the services that you offer?
Sure. So my background sort of helps tell the story of why we sit where we sit. I spent a decade in creative advertising and digital marketing. So my background has been strategy for the likes of Sony, MasterCard, Mercedes-Benz, Medtronic, always enterprise clients from the eyes of a small to medium business. I was the 10th employee at an agency in Australia that grew to about 35, and I was the 15th in LA that grew to about 40. And both sort of gave me a look into e-commerce and just general digital marketing, everything from content production and video creation, TV commercials, media buying, the works. So I found my way into Amazon about 4 years ago now, approximately. There was an Amazon business that I joined as a partner in, and it was doing about 2 million in revenue. 12 months later, we'd grown it to 5 million. It got acquired by Thrasio, and what we built inside of that framework, inside of that business, was effectively a recruitment function to build out our own agency in the Philippines. And, I instantly, I've been working with the Philippines for 4 or 5 years now, but I pretty quickly fell in love with the culture. I mean, just to give you a bit of background of the Philippines, like I said before, onlinejobs.ph, it's the gateway drug. It gets you sort of hooked on what is possible. And obviously the geolocation-based arbitrage makes it a super attractive offer. Now, when you find talent like Joan and like some of the consultants that we have, which is honestly hard to attract at the start when you're trying to build your name and build your reputation, but once you get through those aspects of it, you've got talent that I would argue is better than that you'll find stateside for particular roles. Like I'd find it hard to believe that the process improvement consultants that we have inside of Escala aren't some of the best in the world, if not the best in the world. And I would put them against anyone in the US or UK or Australia or anywhere for that matter. So what we did effectively was we recreated that model. And so MultiplyMii became a service-based business to help businesses that are growing really fast inside of the e-commerce space to actually understand, like, how do I understand who the right people are to bring into the business and at what stage? So a lot of the questions that you were asking earlier on, Rob, we actually answer or help support our clients in getting to who they actually need, at what stage they're at. We'll build a job description with them. We'll guide them through that process. We'll have our recruitment team actually vet, go through 5 rounds of interview until we find a top 3. So our process can take, even north of a month to find the talent, but we're searching specifically for people inside of or for the specific business. So it's not like we're sitting here and we have sort of the traditional agency model where you have, let's say, like I said, we have probably close to 150 people on payroll. Each one of those people that aren't working directly inside of Escala or MultiplyMii are 100% resource allocated to a specific client, and they're not moving around. It's their relationship. We just handle healthcare, payroll, social security, HMO, PhilHealth, 13th month, all these sort of finicky details. And that's why they sit on our payroll. So we handle some of the more difficult things that, attracts better talent as well. When you're paying benefits like that, it doesn't go unnoticed, and, helps retention too. And so, yeah, MultiplyMii really is that end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, where we also help with your onboarding planning, KPIs, expectations, responsibilities, who is answerable in the business, how they actually integrate. And we really try and help educate more so the clients that we work with than, the talent that we're working with, on how to actually build a very healthy onboarding plan and strategy so that both of you are driving the same way to what success looks like.
Yeah, I love it. So let's also be sure to give them the contact information, the website, if you want to give out your email or not. So that way, obviously anybody watching visually, I have it up on the screen, but if they're listening on the podcast, tell them how they get a hold of you, Yoni.
Yeah. So if you're listening on the podcast, you can just get me at Yoni at MultiplyMii. That's multiply, but with the me's MII, if you're not seeing the screen. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Yoni Kozminski. You can find me there. But yeah, check out our websites, multiplyMii.com or weareescala.com. And, one of those two, I think the Escala website will get me, and Kat, who's way smarter than I am, you'll get her in the MultiplyMii website if you book a call.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could literally just Google Yoni's name. He does come up quite a bit. But once again, those who are listening, it's MultiplyMii. It's multiplymi.com. So multiplymi.com. And Yoni, always a pleasure having you on. And in fact, actually, I think this is the first time I've had you on any of my podcasts, even though we've spoke many times and been around each other quite a few, especially in the last several months. So yeah, be sure to go check out MultiplyMii. And once again, Yoni Kozminski, he's founder and CEO of MultiplyMii. And Yoni, thanks again for sharing all this great information on, how to hire top e-commerce talent or Amazon talent so companies can be successful or brands can be successful. I really do appreciate your time on that.
It was awesome being here, Rob. I hope I added some value to people listening. And yeah, it's great to finally do one of these with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely great because it's been a while. I've been trying to get a hold of you. So, hey, be sure to listen in. We're going to, the podcast will pick up. I will have a little bit of a delay in the sense of a week off. I have more travel coming up as usual, which is always fun. But yeah, tune in for the next episode of Sellernomics. We'll always have great guests on. And once again, just to mention, in October, we will have some change to the format in the Sellernomics podcast. We will have some Tuesdays of doing some demo type stuff, and Thursdays will be some guest hosts. So be sure to tune in for that. And thanks again, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Sellernomics podcast. Special thanks to our sponsor, GETIDA. Did you know that Amazon probably owes you money for FBA reimbursements? Get $400 in free FBA reimbursements at GETIDA.com/Sellernomics. Be sure to join us again next week for more great tips on how to grow your business. And thanks again for listening.